From Lagos, the nation's commercial capital, this is the News at 10. Live from Channels Television. Reporting tonight, Amarachi Ubani.
Tonight, groups calling for more police reforms continue their protests in several parts of the country, causing traffic gridlock in major cities. Violence mars protests in Lagos and Abuja as pro-SARS groups clash with end-SARS groups. Police authorities say no former operative of the disbanded SARS will be part of the new SWAT, as operations of the new tactical team will be strictly intelligence-driven. Sokoto State Governor Aminu Tambuwal appeals to President Buhari to withdraw the nomination of his aide, Loretta Onochie, as National Commissioner for INEC. Plus, business, sports, and later from our studios in London.
On business news tonight, Central Bank to sanction international shipping companies for non-compliance with federal government's directive on Nigerian export proceeds numbers.
And on sports news, Serie A Disciplinary Commission gives Napoli a 3-0 defeat for failing to turn up for their league game at Juventus on October the 4th.
It's day 8 and the protesters are not backing down. Either the original end-SARS protesters nor the new groups, which are now known as the pro-SARS. The protests have now become a major cause of traffic gridlock in several cities across the country. However, a new twist in the protests is reported as clashes between the two groups, which are sometimes violent, are creeping into the protests, especially in Lagos and in Abuja. Police authorities on their part continue to push their message of a force currently undergoing reformation. And to buttress this, police authorities today announced that no member of the disbanded SARS will be part of the new tactical team SWAT. But let's begin with the protests. The end-SARS protesters today blocked the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, insisting their action is to drive home their demand for the end to police brutality. They're also asking for scrapping of the newly formed Special Weapons and Tactics Team and that the Inspector General of Police resign his position. Earlier, the protesters turned up at Alausa, the seat of Lagos State Government, with music blaring from speakers that they set up.
These unusually quiet streets in Lagos State Secretariat area, save for a few watchers who are not exactly watchers, should not deceive you. You heard one or two talk about their grievances, but behold the bulk of the crowd. Apparently, they were just prepping for the march to the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway to stop all vehicular movement for a few hours. They believe this will help drive home their message. While all of that was happening on the expressway, around the entrance to the Lagos House, there was pandemonium. A couple of people are seen running, apparently being chased by members of the end-SARS movement. It is said that they are miscreants who attempted to scatter the gathering on the expressway.
Well, what gladdens my heart is the peaceful nature of the protests. And quite some time ago, some hoodlums came with cutlass, machetes, trying to infiltrate the protesters.
An attempt to disrupt that blockade was met with serious resistance.
What I would say that maintain your resolve. Don't be intimidated. How can 7 people, 10 people come here and try to intimidate this kind of a crowd?
Why are we here?
The gathering at the Lekki axis was very energetic despite the early morning showers of rain. The demands remain unchanged: end SARS and end SWAT. The protesters insist the government has not done enough and what the country needs is a complete change of system.
This is a time for sober reflection. This is a time to look into the activities that you do, what you engage in, as one that is in position to change things for good.
must be brought to book. Yes. They must be prosecuted. Yes. They must be punished. Yes. They must be held accountable. Yes.
The members of the NSAS movement appear adamant, while the rest of the nation waits and hopes with mixed emotions for a resolution of the situation.
The protests continued in the Federal Capital Territory where major roads were blocked. They insist that the police force should be reformed completely instead of just replacing the Special Anti-Robbery Squad known as SARS with the new police formation called SWAT. On the other hand, dozens of young people who are supporting the police gathered at the Unity Fountain to ask for an end to the protests. They maintain that the ongoing End SARS protest is capable of demoralizing the police.
For 1 week now, protesters, mainly young people, have continued to occupy major streets across the country to protest against police brutality. The protesters, whose earlier call was for the disbandment of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, SARS, now insist on complete police reforms. At the nation's capital, Abuja, End SARS protesters blocked some major roads, causing gridlock. It's a whole week of protest against police brutality across the country. Not even the disbandment of SARS by the Inspector General of Police has been able to end this protest. Some moments later, some yet-to-be-identified armed young people are reported to have attacked the protesters, destroying everything on sight, as shown in this amateur video.
Look at how they did to people's cars.
We will get you another car.
Meanwhile, in another development, dozens of young people gather at the Unity Fountain in Abuja for a solidarity rally for the Nigeria Police Force. The group insists there is no reason to continue with End SARS protest after the Special Anti-Robbery Squad has been disbanded. As 1 week of protest elapses, what is unclear is how long this will go on. But one thing is certain, the agitation for police reforms across the country is real.
We go to Kano, where there was another form of protest, another group supporting the disbanded Special Anti-Robbery Squad. The protesters carrying various placards went around major streets in the state capital before arriving at the government house, where they were received by the state governor, Abdullahi Ganduje.
A coalition of youth in Kano State under the auspices of Movement for SARS Reform have held a peaceful protest march to the Kano State Government House. The group faults the call from other protesters across the country to end SARS, or rather, they call for police reform and reform for the anti-robbery squad. The convener of the protest also appeals to the Kano State Governor, Abdullahi Ganduje, to call the attention of the President, Muhammadu Buhari, on the urgent need to reform the police for the peace and security of the country.
Today, we are on the streets in support of this plan, reform on the Nigerian police. Therefore, call on the IGP to take practical steps to support and enforce the reform. This they do by ensuring adequate funding of the force and the providing of all the needed equipment.
The governor responds to the youths accepting the reform and a result-oriented police institution.
I think this resolution is the right type of resolution that we require. If we attack, you condemn the police as an institution. Can we exist without the security agencies? Can we exist without the police all over the country? If that is the case, we better fish out those bad elements.
These protesters call for an end to all forms of SARS protests across the country.
Call on those that are still agitating for the SARS campaign to silently evacuate from Nigerian streets for peace to reign in our dear beloved country. Support SWAT! We support SWAT!
It's expected that the agitations and demonstrations will yield results towards proper police reform and the safety and security of the country.
The Nigeria police insists no former operative of the disbanded Special Anti-Robbery Squad will be part of the new Special Weapons and Tactics Unit, SWAT. Despite the pronouncement of the Inspector General of Police disbanding SARS, protests have continued in different parts of the country. The police chief then set up SWAT in place of the disbanded SARS and said members of the new unit will commence training next week. In a series of tweets, the police boss explained that the new unit has 5 cardinal points as its mandate, which includes responding to robbery attacks and rescue operations. The police adds that no personnel of the defunct SARS will be selected to be part of the new tactical team. Operations of the new tactical team will be strictly intelligence-driven. Members of the new tactical team will by no means embark on routine patrols. Members of the new tactical team are barred from indiscriminate and unlawful search of phones, laptops, and other smart devices. Operatives of the new tactical team must be free of any pending disciplinary matter, especially those touching on misuse of firearms and abuse of human rights. As Nigerian youths continue the nationwide SARS protests, Citizens Action for Good Governance, a civil society organization, is asking persons behind the street demonstrations to give peace a chance by halting the daily protests. The national coordinator of the group, Mr. Nazir Galadanchi, in a news conference in Abuja, insists that the SARS protesters have already achieved their aim with the disbandment of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad as a first step to reforming the Nigeria police force. He also says failure to put an end to the daily protests will not only destabilize security agents, but provide opportunity for criminals to terrorize law-abiding persons.
On the ongoing protests across the country, we want to unequivocally state at this junction that the dimension the protesters have assumed is really becoming worrisome, because we see that the protests have been hijacked and other actions are seemingly described as unbecoming and threats to national security. We have observed and we want to state that the protesters are now dominated by criminals in the society who have resorted to violence. Recently, protesters have been assaulting security agents, especially officers of the Nigerian force. Many of them have been attacked and injured by hoodlums who are hiding under the guise of protests. Protests gradually turning into anarchy. With the way the protest is going across the country, there is a gradual slide and slip into anarchy. This is indeed worrisome because it may snowball into what might consume the entire nation. Fake news on protests and other unfounded stories. Since the protest started, there have been high level of fake news on social media to create unnecessary tension, pitching Nigerians against the government, and creating civil disobedience to law and order. This is very dangerous for our country.
amongst high-profile Nigerians, also adding their voice to the nationwide protesters. General Overseer of the Redeemed Christian Church of God, Pastor Enoch Adeboye, who has endorsed the protest against police brutality. Pastor Adeboye tweets today, "Our daughters will not be able to prophesy and young men will not see visions if we don't keep them alive. I support the youths in this peaceful protest as they speak up to end police brutality, end SARS, and SWAT." In part two, after the break, we'll have more on the End SARS protests all over the country. We'll be joined by the country director of the Open Society Initiative West Africa, OSIWA, Jude Ilo. Join us again. Welcome back. If it is joining us, you're watching the news at 10, coming to you live from Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. Groups calling for more police reforms continue their protests in several parts of the country, causing traffic gridlock in major cities. Violence mars protests in Lagos and Abuja as pro-SARS groups attack end-SARS protesters in both cities. Police authorities say no former operative of the disbanded SARS will be part of the new SWAT as operations of the new tactical team will be strictly intelligence-driven. Sokoto State Governor Aminu Tambuwal appeals to President Buhari to withdraw the nomination of his aide Loretta Onochie as a National Commissioner for INEC. Sports and news from our studios in London. We're staying with the protests have been going on for about 8 days now. Joining us tonight for more insight into the ongoing clamour for police reforms is the country director for Open Society Initiative for West Africa, Mr. Jude Ilo, who joins us from our studio in Abuja. Mr. Ilo, thank you for joining us on the News at 10 tonight.
Thank you for having me.
We've counted 8 days now from the first day of the protests. What's your assessment so far?
Thanks. I must confess that I think this is our proudest moment as a country. I think what is happening is unprecedented. I think it's something that we need to be excited and happy about because everything that is good about this country is being exhibited by these young men and women who have been on the streets for 8 days. We're seeing the kind of unity that this country has been yearning for. There is no South, there is no West, there is no North in that protest. We're seeing people binding together to help each other out. We're seeing people donating food. We're seeing people donating money. We're seeing the youth of Nigeria finding their voice in a way that actually awakens, in my view, the conscience of this nation, that calls us as a country to live up to the dictates of our constitution, that calls us as a people to come together and seize this historic opportunity to make the best of our country and reform our police. So I would say that I'm really very excited. I'm honored to be living in this country at this moment, to be seeing what is happening. I'm excited by their maturity, by the non-violence nature of their protests. I'm excited by their restraints in the face of provocation by the police and by some of the thugs that have been hired to disrupt the process. And I think every Nigerian should actually be excited by what is happening. This is the kind of the country we're looking for, a country where people have a voice, a country where the youths are setting the example.
It's clear that everyone wants reforms, says need to reform the police. That seems to be the general feeling, but the problem is how to go about that. So what's the best way forward? What would you suggest on how to reform the police force?
I think there are a couple of issues here. I mean, you have the immediate issue, which is to respect the right of protests of Nigerians who are in the streets. The second layer for me is to look at what is already existing, and one of which is the white paper that was developed after the prior investigation into the activities of SARS in this country. And of course, the very measured and productive demands of the young people, which is one, we need to have accountability. A lot of people have been killed by SARS. The names are many. We heard the story of the young woman here in Abuja, Ifoma, who, because her fiancé was not around, was picked up, eventually sexually assaulted, and she died. We have the story of the student who, because of her hairstyle, of his hairstyle, was eventually killed by the police. There has to be accountability for all of these deaths. There has to be accountability for a number of missing people who were picked up by SARS. There has to be accountability on what the officers have done. So what is actually upsetting a lot of people is that these things have happened and the people who perpetrated this heinous crime are walking free. And without accountability, there can be no justice. So the second layer of what the young people are asking for, what I think every Nigerian is asking for, is that there's accountability for the actions that has taken place by the police. There should be accountability for people who have broken heads, killed people in this protest too. The third layer is to begin to look at the instrumentality of policing in Nigeria. How do you then, after you've dissolved SARS, how do you begin to build something different, a different kind of structure that is built on the principles of human rights, that is built on the principle of people-focused and people-responsive policing, that is not built on extortion? The Nigerian police cannot be a criminal enterprise where police officers with gun are supposed to be making returns. It's not supposed to be a police that is reliant on checkpoints to fund the activities of the police. So we want to see a process that begins to reposition the police to be for the people, to be focused on protecting rights and preventing crime, but also a police that is taking care of the police officers. We want to see our police officers properly taken care of, their salary promptly paid. We want to be sure that they have medical and health insurance. We want to be sure that they have insurance policies that when they die, their families are not thrown out of the barracks. This is the kind of police we want. And there are a lot of reports, a lot of inquiries that are all over the place, which we can rely on. But at least the protests in the field have given us, very key demands of ensuring, for instance, that the SARS officers, before they are reabsorbed into the police force, go through a bit of a psychological evaluation to be sure that they are fit and proper to carry arms. So these are some of the things Nigerians are asking for. This is why people are still on the streets. This is why people will continue to make this demand until there's a semblance of accountability and the semblance of clear benchmark, clear roadmap of where the police is going to go from this point to the next point. And so I think that, I watched some of the interviews in the news where people are calling those protesting criminals. I think that is really very offensive. I think that is unfair. I think it's dishonest and quite unpatriotic for people to call the Nigerian youths who are out there saying that we want a better police, who are making demands for better remuneration for police officers, right, who are making demands for accountability, who are making demands to ensure that our children, that they themselves who are on the street can walk the streets of this country without having a heart attack because they are seeing a police post.
Mr.
And
Ilo,
people are coming on national TV to say that they're criminals. I think that is unfair and unfortunate. And so the ingredients of this reform are already there. I must also say that the fact that the Nigerian police came out to say, you know what, we've heard you and we want to do this thing, I think it's a step in the right direction. But we are used to promises. Indeed, and we need to understand the level of distrust in the country already. So we
everyone seems to know that.
Saying.
Okay. Sorry to cut in here, but everyone seems to know that the police really needs to be accountable to the people, and of course the force switches, and of course to also protecting civilians. But then you mentioned the protests and the protesters being referred to as criminals and hoodlums. But there are some beliefs in some quarters that the protests have been hijacked, by criminals and hoodlums. Do you have that feeling as well?
I think it's totally false and actually quite dishonest for any Nigerian to come out and say that this protest has been hijacked. The fact on ground totally says something different. How can a protest be hijacked when these young men and women are even cleaning our streets after their protests? How can a protest be hijacked when they are the ones raising money to hire toilets for the protesters, to buy food for each other? How can it be hijacked when they are the ones taking people who have been injured to the hospital to be taken care of? I think what we're seeing in the streets of Nigeria now is an example of what Nigeria should be, where we watch out for each other, where we are measured in our words, where we are respectful in our demands, where as a country we are binding together and making sure the weakest of us is able to be lifted up. Because if you watch what's going on there, when people are exhausted or can't go on, people carry them. In Abuja today, the hoodlums went and started beating up, hitting at cars, destroying cars and all of that. And people are coming together to raise money to fix those cars. And people can't say that this has been hijacked. The message is still the same. Stop killing us. Reform the police. Treat our police officers better. In what way can anybody conceive that these bold and strong and courageous, beautiful Nigerians in the field who are making us realize what we have missed as a country, that they are hijacked, they are not speaking their voices? It is unfortunate for anybody to say that. And I challenge any Nigerian to bring evidence to this table to say that the people in the streets are not speaking their voices.
Jude Ilo, Country Director for Open Society Initiative for West Africa, thanks again for joining us on the News at 10.
Thank you very much.
And when the News at 10 returns, Central Bank of Nigeria to sanction international shipping companies for non-compliance with federal government's directive on Nigerian export proceeds numbers. We'll have more in business news. Please join us again. Welcome back. A federal high court sitting in Lagos has fixed November 18th to rule on a no-case submission filed by social media celebrity Ismaila Mustafa, also known as Momfa. Momfa is accused of cyber fraud and laundering about 33 billion naira. He had pleaded not guilty and through his lawyer, Boyega Oyewole, filed a no-case submission, insisting that the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission had made no case against him, requiring him to enter a defense. In his response, the prosecution counsel, Ibrahim Sulaiman, asked the court to dismiss the no-case submission application. He told the court that the prosecution had been able to link the defendant to the alleged offences based on the evidence adduced and exhibits tendered through 10 prosecution witnesses who had testified in the matter. After listening to both submissions, Justice Mohammed Liman adjourned to November 18, 2020 for his ruling on the no-case application. Military authorities say they have arrested Kumar Fachi, who is believed to be the second in command to the late militia leader Tewase Akwaza, also known as Ghana. Fachi was arrested by the men of 4 Special Forces Command, Doma, at Kasinala, where he was said to be hiding at a private residence. The commander of the 4 Special Forces, Doma Munde Ali Gadzama, says Fachi is the 76th member of the gang to be apprehended by the military, while 4 others, including Ghana, have been killed. Sokoto State Governor Aminu Tambuwal has added his voice to the debate on the nomination of presidential aide Loretta Onochie as a national commissioner for INEC. The governor is appealing to President Buhari to withdraw the nomination, as it is in the best interest of the country's electoral system. In the same vein, the governor is also asking the Senate to reject her nomination if the president fails to withdraw her nomination.
Appealing to President Muhammadu Buhari to rise above sentiments and do the needful. Go by the Constitution as President of Nigeria and not President of APC, to withdraw the nomination of Loretta Onochie in the interest of this country. We must be seen to be doing what will consolidate our gains in the electoral process, not what will obviously put us in a reverse gear. This individual is known to be ultra APC, partisan, and very clearly someone that cannot be recommended for this office. So I appeal that Mr. President should reconsider his position and respond to the comments and remarks of well-meaning Nigerians on this nomination. He can go back to either the same state or the South and get a more credible, more competent person to occupy that office.
The Federal Executive Council has approved a $2 million annual contribution as the country's 2020 running costs to the West Africa Power Pool, WAP. This was disclosed by the Minister of Power, Mrs. Saleh Maman, while briefing State House correspondents after the Federal Executive Council meeting presided over by President Muhammadu Buhari. The council also approved 1.2 billion naira for the supply of security equipment for 7 railway stations for the Ministry of Transport and a national policy on virtual engagements from the Ministry of Communication. Our State House correspondent, Kayla Megwa, has more.
The 19th Virtual Federal Executive Council meeting holds at the council chambers of the State House in Abuja. 5 hours of deliberation resulted in the approval of several memos by the council, beginning with the approval of a $2 million contribution from Nigeria as our 2020 running cost to the West Africa Power Pool from the Ministry of Power.
Is for the generation of electricity throughout the region, so as to have robust, constant and steady power supply. In case, it's just like a national grid we have here in Nigeria. Now we're going to have a regional grid. In case there's a failure in any of the country, so they are there to augment.
1.2 billion naira was approved for the supply of security equipment for 7 railway stations from the Ministry of Transport.
Idu, Rigasa, Jere, Kubwa, Kaduna and Kano in favor of Messrs. Advonics Services Nigeria Limited in the sum of 1,208,325,464 naira 60 kobo, inclusive of 7.5% tax, with a completion period of 12 months.
22 billion naira approved for an 8.1 kilometer stretch of the Apapa-Oworonshoki Road from Ministry of Works.
You must know that this is one of the projects that's been awarded under the Infrastructure Tax Credit Scheme. In other words, it is awarded to Dangote, and Dangote is going to construct it, and over the years, it will be deducted from tax payable by the group.
The Director General of the Bureau of Public Procurement also presented a memo on e-government procurement aimed at reducing the turnaround time for due process, which will cost 1.6 billion naira. And the Minister of Communication got approval for a national policy on virtual engagements as a lower costing, more transparent means of governance in federal public institutions, even after the COVID-19 pandemic ends. From the State House in Abuja, Kayla Megwa, Channels Television News.
Development and investment in the gas sector in the southeast has been identified as one of the easiest ways for Nigeria to diversify her economy as an alternative to oil sector. The views of the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Timipre Silva, and Imo State Governor Hope Uzodinma, as well as the GMD of the NNPC, Mele Kyari, at the Southeast Gas Utilization Forum 2020. The organizers say there is need to leverage on the nation's gas resources, which is estimated at 182 trillion cubic feet, to create a large industrial gas economy that will address unemployment in the country.
It is the 2020 edition of the Gas Aggregation Company Nigeria Limited Southeast Gas Utilization Forum in Owerri, the Imo State capital, which is playing host to this year's event. Stakeholders in the gas sector, the Imo State Governor Hope Uzodinma, the Minister of State for Petroleum Timipre Silva, and representatives of the other 4 Southeast governors are all present here. The chairman of Gas Aggregation Company of Nigeria Limited, Mansour Sambo, explains the essence of the forum.
We have a shareholding structure that is spread across people who produce gas and then people who consume the gas. It has a dual mandate of being a matchmaker of the gas users and then the gas producers. and it has also another mandate of expanding the gas utilization within the country. What we are witnessing today is that second mandate of gas expansion and utilization.
The Minister of State for Petroleum, Timipre Silva, says the federal government is committed to the development of the gas sector as the forum aligns with the vision of federal government to create jobs, grow the economy, and take Nigerians out of poverty.
You can see that if we really develop gas and we go, for example, into the petrochemical sector, that will also open up other vistas of development. And everyone knows that the Southeast is one region where an industrial miracle is waiting to happen.
The Imo State Governor, Hope Uzodinma, says his government welcomes any initiative that will accelerate industrialization and enhance economic development in Imo State and the entire Southeast.
Companies involved in the gas refining business should find Imo State a natural destination for investment, given the large deposit of the raw materials they need in the state.
The consensus at this forum is that the easier way to diversify the nation's economy is to pay more attention to the development of gas. And the Southeast is a region ready for investments.
And Mamodo is standing by with business news.
Banking, so easy, so simple. Dial *894# now to experience it. You first, First Bank.
Thank you, Amarachi. Welcome to Business News. The Central Bank of Nigeria says it will apply strict sanction on shipping companies that do not comply with the federal government's directive in structuring all export goods to carry Nigeria Export Proceeds Numbers (NXP). At a virtual meeting convened by the Financial Market Regulator and attended by representatives of shipping lines in Nigeria, the governor of the central bank, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, says an audit of shipping companies shows that several of them were not complying with this directive. Mr. Emefiele mentioned that a circular will be sent out to shipping lines and relevant agencies like the Nigerian Shippers Council, the Ministry of Finance, the Nigerian Customs Service, among others, to address some of the challenges faced by shippers regarding the NXP form. The World Bank says it has approved $12 billion for developing countries to purchase and distribute vaccines, tests, and treatments for COVID-19. In a statement released today, the Bretton Woods institution says the funding is part of a package of up to $160 billion, which seeks to support developing countries in combating the pandemic. The funding, which targets vaccination of up to 1 billion people, will be an addition to the bank's COVID-19 emergency response program that are already reaching 111 countries around the world. The World Bank, in a new funding, is also meant to help countries access tests and treatments, as well as support the management of supply chains and other logistics for vaccination. And let's head to the local market, where positive performance on the price table led the domestic stock market, ending today's session a little changed as the total volume of trades dropped by 59.2% in contrast to previous sessions this week. Ekaite Afia has the details.
Welcome to the Stock Market Report. Wednesday's trading session at the stock market ended in what can best be described in a notable quote as "No victor, no vanquished." Now, this is because the NSE's benchmark index closed the day with no change in percentage terms, while total value of listed equities eked out a 1 billion naira gain to close at 14.851 trillion naira. Now, traders attribute the flat close in the midweek trading session to the ongoing protests against police brutality across the country, which is being closely watched by the investing public as well as the international community as it enters the 8th day. So despite the standstill on the market's main index, stocks performance on the activity chart recorded some movement, but this time, investors' appetite for stocks was lower by more than 50% against Tuesday's figure, as 218.42 million shares changed hands in over 3,800 transactions. Now, these are quite uncertain times for for the market as no one knows what to expect in the next trading session. But optimism remains in the watchword for investors. That's all for the stock market report. I'm Akaite Afia.
Thank you, Akaite. Meanwhile, major global stock markets have finished midweek trading session mixed after investors reacted to a speech from Chinese President Xi Jinping, while comments from U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin dampened expectations of a coronavirus stimulus deal being reached before November the 3rd presidential election. But let's see how they all ended today. And that's Business News tonight. Thank you for watching. I'm Anne Nwawadu. It's back to you, Amarachi.
Banking, so easy, so simple. Dial star 894 hash now to experience it. You first, First Bank.
Thanks, Anne. On the foreign scene, France has been put under a state of emergency over the rising number of COVID-19 cases in the country. That announcement was made by President Emmanuel Macron, who also announced a curfew on Paris and 8 other cities from 9 p.m. to 6 p.m. starting Saturday over the next 4 weeks. A country like others in Europe has been experiencing a fresh wave of coronavirus in recent days. Simon Pusey has more international news in Around the World in 5.
Good evening and welcome to the Channel Studios here in London with your international news around the world in 5. Tighter restrictions have been introduced in parts of Europe in response to a rapid rise of coronavirus infections.
Is that if we do the regional approach...
A new 3-tier alert system has taken effect in England, with millions of people facing extra curbs. The Liverpool region is the only area to be under the toughest rules, with the closure of pubs and bars that do not serve meals.
Feitelijk gaan we naar...
Meanwhile, the Netherlands has imposed a partial lockdown, closing bars and restaurants as it battles to control the virus in one of Europe's major hotspots. Mask wearing has become compulsory indoors. The measures will last 4 weeks, with a review of their impact after 2 weeks. Elsewhere in the world, more than 4 million people have been tested for COVID-19 in the Chinese city of Qingdao. China has said it aims to test all 9 million residents within 5 days after 5 new cases were detected over the weekend. US Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden has criticized Donald Trump's handling of coronavirus while courting elderly voters in the key battleground state of Florida.
One day before we crossed...
He told them that the president saw seniors who have been more at risk in the pandemic as expendable. Opinion polls suggest Biden has a 10-point average over Trump nationally ahead of the 3rd of November election, but his lead in some key states like Florida is narrower.
Donald Trump is simple. Not a joke. You're expendable. You're forgettable. You're virtually nobody. That's how he sees the seniors. That's how he sees you. It's no surprise. This is the same man who looks at Americans who put their lives on the line like you did, sir, and many others maybe in this room, for our nation, and calls them losers and suckers.
Heavy fighting has erupted once again in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict as Russia has tried to enforce a ceasefire agreed by Armenia and Azerbaijan last weekend. Azerbaijan has said it destroyed missile sites inside Armenia, which it claims were used to target civilian areas, and its president has said military operations are continuing. Nagorno-Karabakh is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but the enclave is controlled by ethnic Armenians. Thousands of Thai anti-government demonstrators have overtaken Bangkok's Democracy Monument in a symbolic move in their fight for democracy. It comes on the anniversary of the 1973 uprising that brought down the then military government. Among protesters' demands are for curbs on the constitutional powers of the king and for him to transfer back the personal control he took of some army units and a palace fortune valued in the tens of billions of dollars. Rwanda has approved the production and export of cannabis for medical use as a way of boosting its revenues. Only licensed producers will be involved in the trade, and cannabis consumption will remain prohibited locally. Unapproved production and sale of cannabis risks harsh penalties, including a life sentence, while consumption can lead to a maximum of 2 years in jail. Last year, the global cannabis market was thought to be worth $150 billion. That's according to Barclays Bank. Australia's Great Barrier Reef has lost more than half of its corals since 1995 due to warmer seas driven by climate change. That's according to a recent study. Scientists have found that all types of corals have suffered a decline across the world's largest reef system. It comes after mass bleaching events in 2016 and 2017, as well as more mass bleaching this year. The Great Barrier Reef runs 2,300 kilometres down Australia's northeast coast. It was World Heritage listed in 1981 by UNESCO as the most extensive and spectacular coral reef ecosystem on the planet. A Russian spacecraft carrying a US astronaut and 2 Russian cosmonauts have blasted off from a cosmodrome in Kazakhstan and have successfully reached orbit.
3, 2, 1.
The crew members travelling to the International Space Station are Kate Rubins, a NASA microbiologist who in 2016 became the first person to sequence DNA in space, and Russian cosmonauts Sergei Rykov and Sergei Kudzvikov. The mission is the last scheduled Russian flight carrying a US crew member. And finally, 2 cliff diving champions have dived 120 metres underground in the Salina Turda, one of the world's oldest salt mines in Romania. In a never-done-before feat, Rhiannon Ifland of Australia and Romania's Constantin Popovici leaped from the walls of the mine into the underground lake in the depths of Transylvania. 120 metres under the surface of the Earth and surrounded by a science fiction-like wonderland, the athletes went from 85 kilometres an hour to 0 in almost twice the usual speed due to the water's high density. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel Studios in Lagos.
Thanks, Simon. Going to toss it over now to Ayotunde Balogun for Sports News.
Many thanks, Marachi. The Ministry of Youth and Sports Development has renewed hope for the resumption of all contact sports, including football. The ministry is, however, insisting on full compliance with all health and safety protocols before any sports event is organized. This means that the Nigeria Professional Football League, the National Handball Premier League and the Nigeria Basketball League are set to restart pending approval of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. Napoli FC had been given a 3-0 defeat and had 1 point deducted for failing to turn up for their Serie A clash at Juventus on October the 4th. The Serie A's disciplinary commission ruled that there was no force majeure preventing Napoli from travelling despite 2 positive COVID-19 tests. Napoli remained in isolation on the instructions of health authorities in the Campania region. Serie A also ruled that the complaint lodged by Napoli regarding the legality of the match is to be considered inadmissible. Napoli FC are expected to lodge an appeal. Meanwhile, Serie A champions Juventus have sent their squad into isolation after midfielder Weston McKennie tested positive for COVID-19. Juve did not give any further details on the condition of McKennie, a US international who joined them on loan from Schalke 04 this season. However, the club made it clear that training and matches will continue as normal for players who continue to test negative. This comes after Portugal forward Cristiano Ronaldo tested positive while on international duty. English Premier League clubs have unanimously agreed to reject the radical Project Big Picture plan to restructure English football. Under the controversial proposals, the number of teams in the Premier League will be cut from 20 to 18 and the League Cup scrapped. More power will also have been handed to the biggest clubs in the top flight in exchange for a rescue package and greater share of broadcast revenues for the English Football League. The Premier League also agreed a rescue package of $65 million in the form of grants and interest-free loans for clubs in the lower leagues who face financial crisis without the return of supporters to stadiums. The Swiss courts have returned to the South American Football Confederation $40 million, which had been retrieved from 2 former officials accused of corruption. The Office of the Swiss Attorney General opened proceedings against the former president of CONMEBOL, Nicolas Leos, who died in August 2019, as well as Eduardo De Luca, who was Secretary General for 23 years. They were accused of having received bribes in exchange for the allocation of TV broadcasting rights for competitions organized by the CONMEBOL, including the Copa America and the Copa Libertadores. Leals, a former vice president of FIFA, was also implicated in an American bribery investigation over World Cup bidding, but the Peruvian's death in August 2019 prompted proceedings against him to be dropped. And the Athletics Integrity Unit has banned Daniel Wanjiru for 4 years after the 2017 London Marathon winner was found to have committed a doping violation. Wanjiru was provisionally suspended in April for use of a prohibited substance after abnormalities were found in his biological passport. The suspension has been backdated to start from December the 9th last year. The Athletics Integrity Unit says all of his results from March 2019 are disqualified, with all resulting consequences, including forfeiture of any medals, titles, ranking points, and prize and appearance money. I'm Ayotan Mubarak, and that sports news is back to you, Marachi.
Tunde, and the main news again. Groups calling for more police reforms today continued their protests in several parts of the country, causing traffic gridlock in major cities. In the nation's capital in Lagos, pro-SARS groups attacked the End SARS protesters. Also today, police authorities said no former operative of the disbanded SARS will be part of the new SWAT, as operations of the new tactical team will be strictly intelligence-driven. And French President Emmanuel Macron declared a state of emergency over the nation's health sector as cases of coronavirus remain on the rise. That'll be all the news track. Thanks for watching. On the news at 10, Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Good night.